Thank you for joining us for this Warrior Wellness webinar on TBI recovery and physical fitness. And we have the amazing Lieutenant Gabrielle Ryan with us, and we are so lucky to have her present on this topic for our Fire Team Whiskey participants, because she is a subject matter expert in this field. Not only is she super smart, she knows everything about TBI, but she has a personal story as well when it comes to her own struggles with her own traumatic brain injury. So this is a great topic and very pertinent when it comes to our Fire Team Whiskey participants, because some of you may have had a traumatic brain injury in the past, even if maybe it was very mild. So these are things that you have to kind of keep in mind when it comes to improving your health, not just physically and with your nutrition, but also making sure that your brain is healing as well, because your brain is your body's computer, and if things are going funky in there, then it's going to affect everything else in your life. So it is important for you to educate yourself about these issues, especially if you've encountered this, and do the things that you can do to help heal your brain. So I'm just going to ask Lieutenant Ryan to maybe introduce herself, her kind of background, and how she fell into becoming a TBI specialist, and then we'll go from there with her presentation.
All right, thank you, Stephanie, and thank you everybody for joining. My name is Gabby Ryan, and as Stephanie mentioned, I had a TBI in 2010, and from that time on, for the next several years, getting in shape and being mentally fit to continue my service in the military, which I had joined in 2009, was a real challenge. So one of the things that I found after several years was that exercise really helped out with my recovery. I had kind of hit a plateau where I was feeling moody, I was feeling frustrated mentally, and physically just was not meeting military standards. So exercise for me was probably the single most important factor in my recovery. Using exercise along with therapy and medical treatment was what really finally helped me start moving forward after my brain injury. So with that said, my current job is to teach military service members, medical providers, and our partners out in the community about traumatic brain injury and about some of the challenges that service members face in recovery. So I work for the Defense and Veterans Brain Injury Center, and as part of my job, I'm happy to share with you guys what I have learned about exercise and share some of the latest research on why exercise is really important for traumatic brain injury recovery.
Fantastic. And just to mention that Gabriella is also a lieutenant in the Florida Army National Guard. So she is not only an expert in this field and works for the Defense Veterans Brain Injury Center, but she also is in the uniform. So she has that experience on that end as well as a soldier. So I'm going to let you take it away, Gabriella. Thank you.
All right, thanks a lot. So I just want to share some statistics first. There's a lot of service members in the post 9/11 military that have experienced traumatic brain injury. And there's so many people that have experienced it that it's actually considered one of the invisible wounds of war. That's what we call it in the medical community. The TBI wounds, along with PTSD, are probably the single most problematic issues that we see in returning service members. And the Defense and Veterans Brain Injury Center has put together a lot of data, and throughout the military since 2000, we found that almost 400,000 service members have been diagnosed with traumatic brain injury, and we suspect that there's many more service members who are undiagnosed. So this is a huge problem across all branches, in all combat fields, and even at home. And in fact, just in the first quarter of 2018 alone, there were 4,300 reported brain injuries in the military, and that's worldwide. So traumatic brain injury is a huge public health concern for us. It's a concern within the VA medical system, which is where I actually work on a daily basis. But the good news is that more than 80% of all of these brain injuries are mild, and that means that most people don't lose consciousness. The outlook for recovery is pretty good. And physical fitness, which is what we'll be discussing today, is one of the keys to overall recovery and return to duty. Like I said, for me in my personal journey to recovery, it was a huge step. And it's a means not only for physical function to improve, but also for empowerment. A lot of people think that a brain injury is something that just happens to you and you are subject to headaches and weight gain and depression for the rest of your life. But as I found, and as a lot of other patients with brain injury have found, there is a way to take charge of your recovery, and exercise is a huge piece of that. So, talking about your brain, specifically after a brain injury, I just want to do a quick review. What is traumatic brain injury? Well, it's a disruption in brain activity caused by an external force. So in a military setting, we think of IEDs and blast explosions, but we also have a lot of falls in the military, a lot of vehicle collisions, and a lot of sports and combatives contact injuries. So these are those head injuries when you're out doing combatives, playing basketball, etc. And most of you probably know this, brain injuries can be mild, moderate, or severe. Like I said, mild injuries are by far the most common, which is good news because we see recovery within a few days on most of those mild injuries. But brain tissue itself, it's a jello-like consistency, so it's very, very soft. And although it's protected by the skull, it's really easy to bruise that brain tissue. And unlike a lot of other tissues in your body, brain tissue doesn't just regrow and regenerate. It doesn't just heal like a muscle would. So after an injury, that brain tissue is disturbed and it takes quite some time for it to recover, even after a mild injury. Also after an injury, your brain chemistry is disturbed. So within your brain, you have chemicals, which we call neurotransmitters. And these are little things that control your mood, personality, ability to regulate your emotions. And all of those things are disturbed even after a mild brain injury. And those of you with a TBI can probably attest to this. After an injury, you might not have any physical symptoms, but your personality changes, you start to feel depressed, you have a lot more difficulty regulating anger, you might have angry outbursts with your kids or your spouse. So these are all common symptoms after a traumatic brain injury. And as with any other injury, especially in the fitness field, we know that with muscular injuries, rest is the key. It's the same for your brain. And brain rest specifically means no computers, no phones. Screens can cause headaches and visual issues, no reading, and limited movement. So if you've had a brain injury, you might have experienced this rest period. You might have interacted with a medic or military medical provider who put you on quarters or told you not to do anything for 24 hours. But the thing is, when your symptoms start to relieve a little bit, when that headache kind of goes away, when that ringing in your ears goes away, the brain really needs stimulation. It needs nutrients, and it really needs a new challenge. So rest is great, but rest can't be your excuse. At some point, you have to start doing things to recover that brain tissue. Now, moving on to your body after a brain injury, you might not have any outward physical symptoms. You might not have bleeding or broken bones, especially after a blast injury. A lot of people think that they're fine because they're not outwardly hurt. But just like the brain, the body does need rest after an injury. But when your headache, tinnitus, which is ringing in your ears, and all those other symptoms that you're familiar with, when they start to become bearable, it's really time to get up and move. Now, starting out too intense with your physical activity can actually harm your recovery. So we recommend a gradual and phased return to activity. That's really the key. So starting out slow is important, but starting out is more important. And your ultimate goal should really be unrestricted, intense activity. There is absolutely no medical reason for most people after TBI to not be able to return to full physical fitness. Exercise is really critical in beginning to reduce your post-injury symptoms. And these are sometimes symptoms that can't effectively be treated with medication. So if you've had a TBI and you've had some of the symptoms I'm about to list, you might have gotten some kind of medication from the VA or been told to go to therapy, and you're just not seeing improvement. So a lot of times people with TBI will experience weight gain. This is one of the most common complaints with our TBI patients within the VA. They also report negative mood and increased stress levels. We hear a lot about low energy, just not having the energy to work out. We hear a lot about poor sleep, which of course contributes to low energy. And we also hear about a lot of weakness in muscular strength and cardio endurance. So even though a TBI is a brain injury, because the brain controls pretty much every aspect of your body, a lot of these other issues can still be affected. So what do you do to recover? Well, aside from the medications, which probably aren't that effective for you, exercise is really the key. So how exactly does exercise reduce your symptoms? Well, at a very basic chemistry level, exercise increases blood flow to your brain. So think of blood as like a nutrition shake for your brain. It carries critical energy sources and nutrients all throughout your brain. And after a TBI, those damaged areas of your brain are really thirsty for these nutrients. And the only way to get them there is to increase the blood flow. There's no medication that we know of. There's no other treatment that can bring those nutrients to your brain. So what is the best way to increase blood flow to the brain? Exercise. Exercise is great because it forces the blood into those damaged areas, and it also forces oxygen into those areas. So that is the only way that we know of for brain tissue to really start to heal. Like I mentioned before, it's not like a strained muscle where it can grow back and grow stronger. Brain tissue is very vulnerable to injury. So those nutrients in the blood, especially oxygen, are really important for recovery. Now, once that blood flow is increased through exercise, we also see an increase in the flow of those neurotransmitters. So that is that chemical process that I mentioned that increases the speed of your impulses in the brain. So as the blood increases, the speed of your thought processes quite literally increases. So after a TBI, a lot of people will say that they're thinking more slowly, they're having a lot of memory issues. There's a lot of people who report not being able to remember people's names, not being able to remember important birthdays. So increasing exercise and increasing blood flow can actually reduce those symptoms by increasing your thought process. Now, exercise should not make your symptoms worse. A lot of people with brain injury worry that it's going to increase their headaches, that it's going to damage brain tissue. This is just not true. And if you do start to exercise again and you start having worse symptoms, like you start getting migraine headaches, you probably do need to ease up on your exercise or change the type of exercise that you're doing. However, keep moving. Like I said, there's no medical reason not to exercise after a brain injury. So it's generally safe to gradually build back up to intense exercise. Now, I will say if you experience balance issues, that's a common problem in our TBI patients, especially if you've been in a blast situation, IED explosion. Please ask for help from a physical therapist. Balance issues can cause some real risk when you're using weightlifting equipment and other types of equipment, or when you're doing sports. So that is the one time where you want to enlist the help of someone else. Otherwise, you can usually start doing your basic exercises at home. You can start doing your light cardio. So let's talk about specifically what this exercise gradual improvement would look like. The return to exercise plan will really look different for everyone, but exercise is beneficial for all people, especially those with traumatic brain injury. So you'll see on the slide, there is kind of a sample exercise plan, and I'll explain why those specific numbers are in there in a moment. But I just want to mention the benefits of exercise can be especially helpful for TBI, as a lot of people with brain injury report difficulty in those areas that I mentioned: weight management, stress management, mood issues, depression, PTSD, strength, and energy levels. So what we've found in our medical research is that traumatic brain injury survivors who exercise 3 times a week for 30 minutes, just 30 minutes, reported less depression, improved physical abilities, and also felt increasingly connected within their communities, because a lot of veterans go out and work within those veteran fitness groups. They go to CrossFit clubs, or they go to gyms where they finally start to feel like a part of the group again. So we've seen improvement in all these areas, and we've compared that with brain injury survivors who did not commit to a regular exercise program, and we found a huge difference. So our studies show that regular exercise can positively influence your mental thought processes and your overall fitness. So current research suggests, as you see on the slide, that exercising 20 to 40 minutes, 3 to 4 times a week will help you achieve optimal benefit. Now, the key here is we're not talking marathon running. We're not talking hours-long workouts 7 days a week. The key is consistency, but you don't want to overdo it. So maximizing the benefits within 30 minutes or so, a few days a week, will really help you out. But it's important to see what works for you. The most important thing to remember is that any exercise is beneficial for your recovery. Now, there's one important exception to all of this, and that's contact sports. Contact sports really increase your risk of having another TBI. So if you've already had a TBI in the military, or maybe you've had several, and then you want to start exercising again, and you start doing contact sports, they can increase your risk of, like I said, multiple TBIs. And the problem is that even if those TBIs in sports are mild TBIs, maybe you take a hard hit playing football with your friends, that can really complicate or limit your recovery. So it's really important to avoid those types of activities. Keep in mind too, after a brain injury, a person might have difficulty exercising. It might be very frustrating because you're not going to return to your prior fitness level right away. Some people are also actually not able to drive after their injury. That's because some people have visual issues, and you might experience that especially after a blast injury. So you might have difficulty actually getting to a gym or getting to another place to exercise. So that's where you want to ask your friends for help if you really want to go out to the gym. But there's a lot of things you can actually do at home as well. So keep in mind there are physical limitations. And even if you do go to a gym, a lot of people want to return to that heavy weightlifting or CrossFit. But make sure if you're doing that you have a battle buddy, a trainer, or a physical therapist to help you out. You might not notice that you have balance issues or visual issues until you get back in the gym. So you don't want to be caught trying to lift a heavy weight and suddenly feel off balance and drop the weight. And that has happened. So please be careful. Also, some people have difficulty with their thinking skills, or what we call cognition, after a brain injury. So this is where we're talking about problem solving, judgment, reasoning, memory. So these things can also place you at risk while you're exercising. So if you have any of those issues, again, you might want to ask for a battle buddy to help you out at the gym, or ask a trainer for help. But also keep track of your workouts, write them down. Make sure you have a plan when you go into the gym so that you don't lose track of your progress. The ultimate goal of your exercise program is getting back in the fight. There's probably a lot of you listening that are still in the military service. So you still have to take those PT tests. You still have the possibility of mobilizing or deploying overseas. So it's important to get you back to your pre-injury fitness level. We have tons of validated research that reiterates that exercise is really important for this. You're not going to get back to your pre-injury fitness level without committing, and you're probably going to have to commit a little more than you did before your injury. As I mentioned, every recovery plan is different, but we found that 30 to 40 minutes, 3 to 4 days a week, may be most helpful. And more specifically, we found that cardiorespiratory or aerobic activity may be the most helpful. So weight training is great, resistance training is great, but research has shown that it's that aerobic exercise, getting your heart rate up to 60 to 90% of your maximum heart rate for your age, is the most beneficial. Now, something a lot of people don't think about is yoga and stretching. These can also provide critical benefits, including calming your central nervous system. So if you've had a brain injury and you have that stress response, you might have been diagnosed with PTSD also, depending on the nature of your injury. So really, that injury sets your nervous system into overdrive. So you have an increased stress response, and it may be very difficult for you to find ways to relax and calm that response. And exercise can help with that, but it's that yoga and stretching and that deep breathing that can really start to calm your nervous system. And that's really critical for getting into your top physical shape. So make sure that you make time for yoga and stretching in addition to your cardio, your aerobics, your weightlifting, whatever else you do. And also keep in mind, as you make your exercise plan, you may have some logistical challenges. As I mentioned before, some folks can't drive on their own after their injury, and that's okay. You can really do every single exercise you need for recovery, including cardio, including strength and resistance at home. So Fireteam Whiskey has some really great at-home plans that can help, but there's a lot of resources out there. So don't get stuck thinking you have to go to the gym and spend a lot of money and using that as your excuse to not get moving. So in summary, ultimately, your goal should be to get back in the fight, whether that means you're getting integrated back into your military unit and returning to your APFT maxes, or simply returning to functioning well in everyday life. Traumatic brain injury is a common injury, and you, just like most of the service members who have it, can and will make a full recovery if you commit to a regular exercise routine, in addition to your medical treatment, counseling, and whatever else you need. Exercise will really enhance your recovery, and it's going to ward off a lot of preventable issues that happen after injury. Like I mentioned at the beginning, traumatic brain injury is not a death sentence. It doesn't mean that you're stuck with these problems for the rest of your life. Exercise can really change your outcome. And remember that you control the outcome, not your injury. So stay the course and make it your goal to become even stronger than you were before the injury. That is possible. And when you talk to some brain injury survivors, they will tell you that they've become more physically fit. They've got more stamina, more endurance, more muscular strength than they ever did before the injury. So make that your goal. And there's lots of resources that can help. And there's a slide at the end of this presentation with some places to start if you still have questions. You can also reach out to me. My contact info is on the slides as well. And also, if you've never talked to your medical provider about brain injury, if you've never asked for a TBI screening, it may be a good time to do that, because you may be having symptoms of a brain injury but have never been diagnosed. So start thinking back on your military history, and next time you go to your provider, ask them, hey, could I possibly have a brain injury? And with all that said, I wish you good luck in your journey to fitness and wellness, and remember that TBI changes you, but it does not define your physical abilities.